From Nashville, Tennessee, this is Mysterious Matters, for those who dare to think. And ladies and gentlemen, this is October. Halloween is right around the corner, and let me tell you, I absolutely love Halloween. As a matter of fact, if I could replace Santa Claus, you know that big jolly guy that goes down chimneys, if I could replace him with a nasty-looking clown that went by the name of Santa Claus, and he would just bring you tricks and nightmares, I would do it, at least for 1 year. I don't think I'd get away with it for more than 1 year. But joining us this evening is Stephen Lancaster, and Stephen is the producer of an independent paranormal investigation program called Monster Vision TV. And we'll be sure to get Stephen to tell us a little bit about Monster Vision TV when he gets on air with us. Stephen is here to discuss his book, Dark Spirits, A Man Terrorized by the Supernatural. And if after listening to this program you are interested in reading Dark Spirits by Stephen Lancaster, you can go to mysteriousmatters.com/darkspirits. Again, that is mysteriousmatters.com/darkspirits. And without further ado, Stephen, welcome to Mysterious Matters.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's definitely our pleasure to have you here with us this evening, Stephen. At the very beginning of this program, I mentioned that you were the producer of an independent paranormal investigation program called Monster Vision TV. Would you mind giving us some information on what Monster Vision TV is?
Sure. It started back in 2007. I'm coming up on about the 10-year anniversary of it, and it kind of started as a joke. I just at that point started to form my own paranormal team. Up until then, I ran solo, and we had investigated this pretty incredible place. And I had said to my colleague, I said, we should show people this stuff. Show them what it's like to actually investigate, not what they're used to seeing on television. Back then it was ghost hunters and paranormal state.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I want to show people through the eyes of the investigators, like our perspective. So you would rarely ever see one of us unless we looked at each other. So you would watch the investigation. It was filmed like an episode, but after the fact. So after the investigation, weeks at a location or days, however long it was, in some cases years, I would compile everything and try to add an entertaining quality to it. But you were literally like you were in the investigation. It's like you were there, almost like 3D, so to speak. And I threw it up on YouTube, and people just fell in love with it. Within a year, by 2008, we had over 1 million views, 11,000 subscribers, which, is nothing in the grand scheme of things. And then come 2009, we were 2 million views worldwide. And I think I ran it about 6 seasons, and there was never a set schedule because we were at the will of reality. We couldn't say this season was going to be 10 episodes. We basically put up a season when an investigation produced what could have been perceived as, something paranormal. And in 2013, it began to, with me writing the books and doing other radio shows, and it just got to be too much because I ran a team of 8 people. And on average, if you would do an 8-hour investigation, that's 8 cameras from 8 people, each with 8 hours of footage, so I'd spend weeks, going through 64 hours of footage, not even counting surveillance and audio recorders, to put this 22-minute thing together. So I kind of thought, well, it's so popular. It's got such a fan base. Why don't we just do one documentary a year, concentrate on that? And that's pretty much it's taken up until now, from about making that decision in 2013 to now, to finally see that part of this evolution of Monster Vision coming to be.
When you're talking about doing one documentary a year, how long exactly would a documentary be? Would it be an hour, 2 hours? What exactly are you doing?
The one that we're actually in post-production on right now, it will be anywhere between 90 minutes to 2 hours. I'm kind of fighting with the distributor. They want me to cut it down. I want to show more. It's kind of one of those things. But that particular investigation, we've worked that case since 2012. So this is 4 years, worth of material.
4 years, one case?
Now keep in mind, that's on top of all the other cases too. It's not just we pick one case and that's the case. There's restaurants I've worked with for 2.5, 3 years now. I always stress to people, again, it's not like you see on TV where a team comes into your house or your business and thinks they have it all figured out in 4 or 5 hours, and that's the last you ever see them. To me, I've always followed the philosophy that you can't be the client in one night. You cannot be the client in one night. You have to live like the client. So we spend years at locations because what once you may have perceived as paranormal, a year later you figure it out and it turns out it wasn't at all, or the other way around.
So true.
So by doing so, we gain this catalog of footage and interviews, and it's interesting putting this documentary together because you see yourself 4 years ago, and then you see yourself now doing the up-to-date interviews, and it's interesting because it shows people what it's really like to conduct research.
I've always been of the belief that paranormal reality TV shows about paranormal investigations, such as Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, that those individuals, those shows are doing a great discredit to the paranormal investigative field altogether. Because people are watching, people are emulating what they're seeing on TV. They are believing that's the way a real paranormal investigation should happen, the way it should be. It's almost the type of mentality that if it's on TV, if someone is called a professional on television, then they must be professionals. Then what they are doing must be the correct way. But it's not always the correct way, ladies and gentlemen. It's not always the best way to go about these investigations. But it definitely sounds as though, Stephen, that you are going about it in a more professional manner. And in the end, it also sounds like you're going to be getting higher quality pieces of evidence. And the evidence that you have isn't just going to be a 12-hour, 24-hour case. You're talking months, possibly years of investigating one case.
I absolutely agree with that. And I used to do a lot of lectures like at libraries and schools and stuff. And I used to say that very thing. The television shows, they create what I call the weekend warriors, these guys that all go out and, they stress more on making themselves look like a metal band than they do paranormal researchers. And they go by what they see on TV. It's EMF this, EMF that. We've got a picture of this, and they emulate exactly what they see. And I've seen it firsthand. I've walked into one of the funniest times is I was in a Lowe's looking for a moisture detector, and some guy yells down the aisle, "Hey, Ghostbuster." Didn't know who he was, but that was his perception of me, a Ghostbuster. I've had clients, when we pulled up with the team, blatantly ask, "Where's the camera crew?" Well, we are the camera crew. But they just, because of what they see on TV, that's what they think it is, and it's not. And it's done more harm than good. It's made talking about it a little less taboo, because when I started in '97, you didn't talk about these things. If I could find a positive, that would be the one thing I would say is people are more apt to talk about it now. But other than that, it hasn't done an inkling of good for the credibility of research.
Now, one thing I've found over the years, doing my own investigations and talking with other people who have done investigations, is that way too many people place a lot of emphasis, a lot of strong emphasis on the possibility that orbs represent a disembodied spirit. But I'll be honest with you, I've never found any valid evidence, nothing solid that proves that orbs are anything more than just a natural phenomenon.
I agree with you. I also agree with, not to change the subject, but a lot of people put that same stock in disembodied voices. I think disembodied voices and orb photos are probably the two most commonly mistaken pieces of so-called evidence. Like you said, dust, fragments of your skin, insects. There are so many possibilities. Moisture. I've never seen one picture in 20 some years that convinced me that an orb is an orb by definition, or is a spirit or a ghost or whatever you want to call it. I've always dismissed it.
And it also sounds like that you're not a firm believer in the electronic voice phenomena.
I'm 50-50 with that one. It's more or less the method I'm against. I've seen a lot of investigators, they're all running around with the audio recorders, which is fine. I've seen them attach the audio recorders to their vests or whatever they're wearing. You're creating so much noise when you walk or when you move, and you're talking about a lot of people that when they finally get to the point of reviewing that 8 hours or 4 hours of audio, this is weeks later. These aren't people who do this for a living, so it's not like they're instantly doing it. So you've got to question, okay, do you even remember what you were doing at that very moment? How many people were in the room? um, I say there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. I've always found it funny that you have a room full of people with video cameras, and the one audio recorder is what has this voice. Why doesn't everything else?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just it should. The way I'd like to see it done is if communication session is going to be held, let's say in a specific room, all aspects of that room need to be surveyed. You need to have cameras pointing out the windows. You need to have cameras on every single investigator, cameras on the audio recorders. So then if you do find something that you believe is a disembodied voice, you can reference all that. Okay, was it something outside? Was it somebody down the road? Was it music from a car that went by? Was it an investigator's stomach? Were they hungry? There are so many things you can disprove if you can see it all. And that's my biggest issue with the disembodied voices is I can't see what happened.
My brother and I have had shared paranormal experiences before in our parents' house, and over several occasions we decided we would take a digital voice recorder and just ask questions such as, is there anybody here? What's your name? And we would rewind the digital tape afterwards, and sure enough, on two occasions, we captured voices that did not belong to anybody in that house. The first one belonged to a woman, and while Mom was in the house at that point, it wasn't her voice. And she wasn't anywhere near us while we were recording either. It's like you said, I believe the reality of an EVP is 50-50. Sometimes it can certainly be a real disembodied voice. Other times you're just picking up audio from different types of audible frequencies, such as radio waves. But sometimes the methods used are just so fundamentally flawed that you really have to discount any evidence coming from those pieces of equipment. And I am referencing those little radio boxes that scans channels for a voice.
Right. Well, it's like I've always said about those. It's so up for chance because how many of us in our life know a Bob? Everybody knows a Bob. Everybody knows a Stephen. So when you're scanning these radio frequencies and you hear a name, well, of course you know that name. It doesn't necessarily mean it's related to what you're doing. I had read somewhere along the lines that the most commonly used words in radio are yes and no and hello. So when you're scanning radio, there's a really good chance that you're going to catch those words. And what are you doing? You're asking questions. So then you capture a yes or a no. And you believe it to be something spiritual, but it's just random. It's just coincidence. And like you said, there are cases that you do get these voices and it's undeniable. Like you said, with no woman being present and you got a female's voice. Those are the kind of things that jump out at me, because I've experienced the same thing, capturing voices, and there's no way it could have been another investigator because there was no female or there was no child there. But there's also room for error. Everything's digital now. Back when I started out, we ran film. That was tedious as can be trying to run film into a computer back then. But there's outside interference. I've seen radio, your walkie-talkies will catch some frequency. Your audio recorders will do the same thing. I remember the biggest example of that. I was working a case in Belmont, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte. And it was this old hosiery factory. And they had turned it into like a mini golf, indoor mini golf. And the story was there. It was good. Allegedly, the former owner hung himself in the office and was found. That part was true. And it was actually one of my investigators said she captured a voice on the audio recorder. And it was a male saying, right there, right there. He kept saying it like he was asserting somebody, it's right there. And I thought, wow, okay, we've got something here. Because it was just me and her in that room. Now, I knew I didn't say it. Well, about 2 weeks later, I'm going through everything that I'm about to present to the owner of that factory or the building. And I'm playing it for him, and he's like, that's me. I said, what do you mean that's you? He said, that's my voice. He said, where were you when you captured this? And I said, we were in this section of the building. Well, this section of the building was on the other side of his office where he stayed that night. He said he was on the phone with his girlfriend, cell phone, trying to explain to her where the car keys are. And he was saying, right there, right there. So there's an example. If we wouldn't have pursued that or talked to him about it, we would have believed that to be something it's not. And all it was is somehow, for a brief moment, what he was saying transferred from that cell phone to that audio recorder. Freak chance, but it did.
Speaking of dark spirits, that's the reason you're here with us today. In your book, you mentioned that you believe ghosts are past, present, and future. What exactly do you mean by ghosts are past, present, and future?
To me, it's a theory. I'm certainly not going to sit here and say it's fact. But after 20 years of doing this, I started to see a pattern with things. A lot of these investigations will spend years at. And, sometimes you capture things that you believe are a child, whether that be a picture or an audio clip or something visual, video. Oh, it's a child. And then maybe 2 months later, you're at that same location and you get a woman's voice or a man's voice. And when you do it for years, like a particular restaurant, not too far from where I'm at right now, I actually moved in on the property and lived there for 2.5 years. And it's in the book, you're talking about dark spirits. I stayed in a room at the Squire's Inn. And although I didn't write about my entire research there, I just wrote about my experiences at the inn. But that was one of the places that started to make me think what we're about to talk about is, are what we seeing in supernatural phenomena or what we know as ghost, is it really the same person? You hear these stories, this location's, they have multiple ghosts. There's multiple spirits there. Do they? Or is it the same one? Are we seeing the past, present, and future of a person, their life? That old phrase, your whole life flashes before your eyes right before you die. Is it something like that at a location, this person is showing us a part of their childhood? Then they're showing us a part of maybe when they were married, mid-30s, and then they show us when they were older. Or, are we just seeing chapters of an individual's life? And that's what I meant by that I don't think there's as many ghosts in one location as many people think there are or state. I think maybe it's just the same one. It's just like watching a movie in a way. We're seeing this person's life in bits and pieces. And that causes us to believe that, well, it was a child, or this person was a child at one point, and that's the part they just showed us,
Oh, okay, yes. When I first read that you believed ghosts were past, present, and future, I thought maybe, just maybe, you meant we were seeing dimensional displacements, otherwise known as ghosts, of people from the past, present, and future. But that's not really the case, so.
Well, it could go every different direction. And I mean, if you think about it, we're investigators are in all these locations and we have all this high-tech equipment. And how do we know we're not talking to somebody that died 300 years ago and have no idea of who we are or what we're using to begin with? I think there's too much assumption out there in the field. We just don't know.
That's something we discussed on this show not too long ago, that life is a mysterious matter. Death is a mysterious matter. Our ego tells us that we know almost everything there is to know about our world, about our life, about our universe. But the fact of the matter is we don't know even 50% of what's going on.
Well, I always make the joke, we can do all this research and hopefully someday, somebody will find that perfect way to determine or prove or disprove this stuff. But it's like I always say, we're never truly going to know until we're there ourselves,
Yes, I definitely know what you're talking about. We have our own ideas of where we are going to, what it's like on the other side. But the fact of the matter is, until we are there, we really only can speculate on what's going to happen to us and what's on the other side. Getting back to your book, you also mentioned that origins of ghosts and intimidating creatures began with the thought that created them. When you discuss the thought that created them, is that something like thought creates reality?
Yeah, I've had a discussion. I was on a radio show back in the spring, and I was talking to this gal from the UK, and I kind of wanted to debate with her, is it psychokinesis or is it ghost? Are some of these things that we're seeing, are we actually doing them ourselves? I mean, everything's connected, um, energy wise. We all have electricity in our bodies. When we die, energy's infinite. It doesn't die, it just simply changes form. So where's that energy going? What's it doing? So it's hard to say. What I really meant by that phrase there was, when you're a kid and you're told Santa Claus exists, you believe it. You believe maybe you just saw him or you just saw the sleigh go across the sky. And then it's up to you as you get older whether or not to continue to believe that. You know, influence is big when it comes to this kind of stuff. What kind of movies are your client watching? What do they read? What have they seen or what have they already been told? And you can lead people in any direction, really. You tell them this is what's happening in here. There's a demon, there's this monster, and then that's what they have in their head, and that's what they start to visualize. Your brain is going to try to make sense of all these things, and it makes sense with what you know. So I think there are ghosts out there, but are people seeing what they think they're really seeing, or is it all created like that monster under the bed?
Speaking of dark entities, I'm not saying this is what these individuals are, but have you seen or have you heard about the clown infestations going on? These mysterious clowns showing up at night, hiding in the woods and other places?
Yeah, I have. One of my buddies got me good the other day. One of my investigators, he was in Tennessee and he called me, and he called me on the house line, so I didn't recognize the number, and he was doing this voice, acting like he was a clown in the woods, saying he could see my house and wanted me to come outside. I'm like, what in the world, And then of course he broke character, but yeah, I don't think that's anything. It's paranormal, all right, but I I don't think by the definition we think.
How awesome would it be if that would have been just a bunch of little Pennywises? A bunch of them.
Yeah, jeez. And even then, that's kind of funny you bring him up because all Pennywise was what you feared. What was in your head, and that's what he would become.
Do you believe in tuppas?
Uh, Give me an example.
Generally, a tuppa is believed to be a being where thought creates reality. A person's hatred, a person's fears, a person's loves can somehow manifest a physical being of sorts, almost like the idea of Slender Man or the idea that these mysterious clown infestations might not just be individuals dressing up as clowns, kidnapping children, but might instead be a manifestation of somebody's fear, somebody's hatred, somebody's desires to kidnap children, to kill individuals.
I don't think to that degree. Wow, that would be awesome if we could. But I do think you can influence the activity. Again, everybody they've always had that feeling of dread, when something bad's going to happen, or, you can pick up positive vibes, you can pick up negative vibes. It's all relative, it's all energy. And I think when you're in a location, and again, you go in there with your mind already made up, that it's something dark or it's something demonic or it's something that can hurt you, your mood, your energy, I think can fuel what's already there if something is there. It's kind of like the two magnets. Sometimes if you don't have them pointed in the right direction, they won't go together. They fight each other. Sometimes they connect just like that. So it's all magnetic. If I'm in there and I'm in a good mood, or the group's in a good mood, or I think that transfers over to what could be there in a way. There's no way of proving that. I've just seen it a lot where if people go into something negative, all of a sudden it seems that the place is negative. Nothing good comes out of it. So are we influencing that? I think that's very possible, but not to that degree to where I think we could manifest something. I don't think so.
Oh, okay, yeah. It's one of those questions that I know a lot of people are interested in, so I wanted to ask. Through all the years that you've been doing your paranormal investigations, how many of the cases that you've had, that you've investigated in personally, that were the equivalent to some of the hauntings we see in certain movies?
Not one. Now, as far as the feelings, sure. The farm case we did for 2 years, where investigators were physically harmed, thrown down steps, thrown up against walls. That stuff was pretty scary. Uh, but it wasn't some 7 foot skinny monster doing it. There just was nothing. There wasn't anything there. It just happened. So as far as like comparing it to, blood coming out of the walls and, monsters as we see in TV or film, never once. There have been things close to where you get a certain camera image and it looks like some kind of creature, but is it, or was it just the lighting was just right at that moment, or there's so many factors that can go into that. Um, I've seen people physically hurt. I've been physically hurt. I've seen locations change people temporarily. But I've never seen houses blow up with electricity flying everywhere and slime coming out of the walls. And it's just not like that.
Have you ever had an investigative case where you're inside of a house or a hotel and all the lights start turning on and off by themselves, cabinets and doors start opening and closing by themselves?
I've seen what people would describe as poltergeist activity. Cabinets opening and closing, doors are a big one, opening and closing. Of course, the light phenomena is huge. One of the best clips I've ever seen, we did a location in Beaufort, North Carolina, right on the water. And there was an overhead ceiling fan and light. The only way to flip this thing on is the light switch on the wall. There was one investigator in there, and she was laying on the bed, kind of facing the ceiling because the light had come on. So it prompted, her attention. So she filmed the camera, or took the camera, made sure she was filming the ceiling. You could see also at the angle the door in the background and the light switch. Well, this went on for probably 6 minutes where she could get that light to come on and off by prompting it one way or another. Can you turn that back on? Bam, the light's back on. Can you turn it off? Bam, the light's off. And this went on for 5 or 6 minutes. And there was no outside manipulation whatsoever. So I believe things like that were being used to communicate. Another really good one was at a location called the Brentwood Wine Bistro. And this particular footage actually made it on the A&E Biography channel, that My Ghost Story show. I did an episode of their show maybe 2010, 2011, something like that. And this particular footage made that. It's we were doing a paranormal conference there, and we had about 25 people attending, plus the speakers. Ghost Hunters International, Shannon Sylvia was there, a few other authors, and people paid to hear the presentations, and then if they wanted to investigate that night, they could. And I made it clear to everybody, look, this is just going to be novel. There's too many of us in this building, to expect anything to really happen. And boy, did I put my foot in my mouth. Half of us were in the kitchen because the stoves came on. Now, this was kind of scary because they're gas stoves. So when fire starts coming out of the burners, you're immediately alarmed, because I has never done that in the 2.5 years I had worked that place. Paranormally speaking, it had never done that. Well, there's a dumbwaiter. And for people out there who don't know what a dumbwaiter is, it's a little elevator that, the waiters and waitresses use to send food up from the kitchen to like the second floor of a restaurant. And there's one switch for it, and it's up in the office upstairs. We all we all were in the kitchen watching this dumbwaiter go up and down. And it would only do it to music. We had, I didn't know it until this moment, but a former contestant of American Idol had come to our conference. She came all the way from Florida to South Carolina, and she started singing Etta James, At Last. And the dumbwaiter light comes on, the dumbwaiter goes up. So I go upstairs to make sure nobody's even in that room that can control it. Nobody's there because it was locked, because that's where the owner's office is. So he made sure nobody could even get back there. He was there, so we both went back there to see. Nobody was manipulating it. I stayed up there with him. Meanwhile, everybody else, we're talking 12 cameras running on this dumbwaiter. And every time this girl would sing, it would go up and down. And we thought, okay, is it her or is it the song specifically? So there was another gentleman there. That happened to be his ringtone for his wife when she would call. So he played the ringtone, and the dumbwaiter did the same thing. Light came on, it went up, and then came back down. It was amazing. This went on for 20, 25 minutes, and we filmed it all different angles from everybody. And of course, that made that TV show. So that was pretty incredible, because it's something that you can visually see isn't being controlled, and something else is doing it with all those witnesses. That's like all the witnesses. 1,000 people see a UFO. How can 1,000 people be wrong?
Unless all thousands own some kind of psychedelic.
Exactly.
Anyways, what can you tell us about this new documentary that you're working on right now called Visitant, the Johnson Family Haunting?
It's, I believe it will become, the case itself will become a household name. What we have seen over the decades are the same regurgitated stories over and over, Amityville, the haunting in Connecticut, all this newer stuff with the Warrens, the Conjuring and all that. I think this will become something like that. Yeah, we took this case back in 2012, and it involved the mayor of a particular town and his huge estate, his house, and 700 acres of former Tuscarora Native American land that him and his family own. And he told us the stories of the stuff that happened, and it's one of those things like, yeah, right, it sounded straight out of a movie. But we went and we researched it, and the very first weekend we were there, one of my investigators filmed a photograph come up off of this table, stop in midair, and then go flying across the room. I was like, okay, yeah. And later that weekend, I'm in the basement, and I felt like the air just felt thicker down there. And my lights on the camera, you either flip them on or flip them off. There's no in between. I would hear them click and they would go off. And then I'd use my flashlight and look at the lights, and the switch had been moved. So something was physically turning my lights off, and eventually put me in blackout to where I couldn't even get the lights to come back on. And I felt what felt like somebody put their hand on my shoulder, like from behind, when somebody walks up behind you and puts their hand on your shoulder. And of course, I kind of jerked around, startled, expecting somebody to be there. Nobody's there. Then eventually all the power comes back on. And, I'm thinking, okay, did I run into something? Was an extension cord kind of hanging from a rafter? There was nothing. So between that and her piece of footage with the photograph, we thought this is definitely warranted. We definitely want to keep coming back. So we did for years. We kept going back, and every time we'd get more and more and more. And then we would dive more into the Native American land that he owns, and the experiences up there with light phenomena and seeing shadow entities. And I finally just asked the guy, I had said to the mayor, I said, would you mind if we told the world your story? I said, I'm in full control of it. Monster Vision, we don't sell out to anybody. So because it's very sensitive in nature. In the house itself, there have been 5 confirmed suicides, all different ages, all different times, all different method, and then 2 related suicides off of the property that came from the house, origin. So, it's a very sensitive story to begin with. And we had to make some promises to leave names out and stuff like that. It's just pretty much a line of dialogue. There were this many suicides involving the house, and we're going to leave it at that. Every marriage that was in that house always failed, and the woman became a raging alcoholic. Whatever is in that house is intelligent, is self-aware, and does not like women. It targets women. And one of the best pieces of footage we're going to show towards the end of this documentary is because of that. When he gave the okay and the family gave the okay to tell their story, We scheduled, a week of filming up there specifically for the documentary. We already had our years of evidence that we were going to show and talk about, and obviously let the Johnson family tell their story. But while we were there, things continued to happen, and I thought, this whatever's in here doesn't like women for some reason. So why don't I leave? Well, and I go outside the house. I'm just going to sit in the car and leave the women in the building, see what happens. And I'm so glad I did that. As cliche as it's going to sound, right at midnight, the alarm starts going off in the mayor's bedroom. Now, he verified later that he has never set his alarm for midnight. He would never have a reason to. But it goes off. Meanwhile, in the room the three girls are in, they're in one of the son's rooms, Paul Johnson's room, where stuff moves around. They're hearing things moving around in the room. Now, what's great about this is it's all being filmed. I'm sitting in the car filming the outside of the building, and they're inside filming. So they're hearing this alarm going off. I'm seeing somebody walking across the first floor. The windows go black, lights that are on in there go black until somebody, like somebody passes a light, and then all of a sudden you can see the light again. I'm like, what in the world? So I radio the girls and is somebody downstairs? Somebody is downstairs. Like, no, we're all together in Paul's room. And I'm like, what is that I hear? And they're like, the alarm's going off. I like, what in the world? So I just keep watching in amazement this figure walking across the entire length of the house, passing every window, coming to the staircase, doing it all again. Meanwhile, the girls are having their own situation. The one investigator had her walkie ripped off of her vest and thrown onto the floor. Now, what makes that interesting is these walkies, I complained about them when we got them, to push that spring to get them to clip is very, very difficult. It's very tight, I guess to prevent it from falling off is the point I'm getting at. Well, this was pulled off of her and thrown to the floor. And then shortly after that, something comes to the window upstairs, 2 stories up, and taps the window with these 3 girls in there. Now, I'm not going to say what that was because I'm going to show it in the documentary, but it is incredible. After that happens, I'm still on the radio, and what's great is the perspective. You see my perspective, you see their perspective, in the house, out of the house. Eventually, one of the investigators comes downstairs to sweep the entire bottom floor because I'm seeing somebody walking. When she comes down, you can vividly see her, see which investigator it is by name. It's her coming down those steps and walking across the building and showing herself in the windows. But whatever was doing it before she came downstairs, you could not make it out. And you'll be able to see that when you watch the documentary, like, okay, maybe that's, they staged it. It's just a person, because it's our word against the world. I understand that. But in that same footage, you're going to see an investigator actually come down the steps and walk the same path as this thing, unknowing of where it's walked because she hasn't seen it yet, the footage. And you can vividly tell it's her. So whatever that was, it's an incredible piece of footage to me.
Sounds like it.
Because, I knew it wasn't them. I knew where they were at. And this was all filmed in real time. So that's kind of like a great climax to it, really. All that stuff happening at once. And we were there just really to film interviews with everybody, film some B-roll, the location and stuff like that. And we ended up investigating and getting the money shot, as they say in the business.
Did you ever find out who that might have been?
Nope. You can't tell whether it's male or female, and the way it moves is just bizarre. Like the main door to the house, there are these 2 really tall windows that are the same height as the door. And at times it was like it was up towards the top of the windows, then down below. It didn't move like a person. And again, when you see Christina come down the steps, like, oh, well, that's that girl we just saw earlier, you're going to know it's her. But in comparison to whatever this is, I have no idea.
Now, this is October. We are in the Halloween month, the month where a lot of traditions, a lot of beliefs actually believe that this represents something called the thinning of the veil, where spirits are more active. Somehow they are stronger. They are allowed to roam. So, in all of your years of investigations, have you ever found that Halloween or October was more active than any other time of the year?
That kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is it just because it's shoved down everybody's throats everywhere? In Walmart, at the movies, on TV, everywhere you turn. Some towns decorate their whole town for Halloween. Some areas are really into it. So is it that level of influence again? You have all these people, ooh, they're trying to scare each other and they're putting out, that vibe, or things happening because you're already kind of on edge. What would not have startled you before might startle you more in October because everywhere you turn, there's something scary, you know? So it's, I don't think it has anything to do with this grand universe or grand system of the paranormal, where October's the Matrix, so to speak. I think it's just coincidental.
I don't know what it's like where you live, but out where we live, around Halloween, they do something called trunk or treat. Essentially, trunk or treat is the idea that it's safer to lure children to a stranger's open trunk full of candy than it is to have a child roaming around your neighborhood of people that you and the child actually does know. Maybe it's just me, but isn't that just teaching kids it's okay to approach cars with open trunks, being lured by the idea that an open trunk represents candy? But maybe that's just how my brain works and nobody else's does.
I agree with you. I never really thought of it like that. Because my experience with the trunk or treats, um, before I started doing the paranormal full time, I was the director of marketing for 4 businesses in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And as the marketing director, you have to create ways to generate business. And somebody had suggested to me, why don't you do a trunk or treat? Our church does a trunk or treat. I'm like, what is a trunk or treat? Back in my day, you got dressed up with your friends and you ran around town wreaking havoc. And,
Oh, yeah.
I understand it's a lot different now, but we have killer clowns like you were saying earlier. But they told me it's just you get all the local businesses or people to come to a specific area, like a church, or in our case, the parking lot of the business, and they decorate their trunks. Some of them with lights, some of them have animatronics. They really go the full 9 yards, or the whole 9 yards, and they give out candy. And it creates a safe. Their argument is it creates a safe environment. They're coming to a place of business. It generates business for you because while people are there going around to all these trunks for their candy, the parents are going inside and buying something, or. So that was my experience. It was always in a safe environment to prevent, in Myrtle Beach, you had all these businesses do trunk or treats, and then you had all the malls do trick or treating, to where you could come to the mall and walk to store to store to store. And, obviously done that way, those ideas are a lot safer than sending your kid out into a neighborhood, especially nowadays.
I could just see the old man from Family Guy going up to Chris with his trunk wide open, filled with candy. Paper boy, won't you come over here and get some candy out of my trunk? I got it wide open just for you. That's a good boy. The good stuff is even further down. Get further in. And then he just shoves them in there, man. I'm telling you.
Now, the sad part is, it's where do you draw the line? We could, because we can't isolate children from the world. Bad things are going to happen regardless.
We used to have so much more fun in our time. I mean, where's the fun in going to a church and getting candy out of a trunk for Halloween compared to what we used to do?
It's not, and it's a shame that it has to be like that because there are evil people that take advantage of situations like that.
And there used to be mischievous children. I mean, there were multiple occasions I'd go around to my neighbor's house, my grandmother's house, and just toilet paper the hell out of those houses to the point where my poor grandmother couldn't even get out of her house because I put on multiple layers of toilet paper pretty much all night long, man.
Absolutely. I mean, it was just one of those things where the neighborhoods expected it. It was kind of an unwritten law, It's okay to do that, egg someone's house or toilet paper their car or their trees, it's just all in good fun. Now it's turned into walking into schools and shooting each other. It's just ridiculous.
It sure is. Well, Stephen, why don't we get into some investigative cases that you've done? Could you give us two of your cases that ended up being the scariest moments, the scariest cases of your entire investigative life?
The first scariest moment in my life was my first experience when I was 10 years old. That's what put me into the field to begin with. Back in '97, I slept in bunk beds with my brother. I elaborate on this story. Great deal in the first book I put out. But basically, long story short, I woke up with something pulling on my ankles, pulling on the blanket. I thought it was my brother playing a joke. And time again, I would look over the rail. He was fast asleep. To eventually, whatever it was became more aggressive, grabbed me by the wrists, pulled me so hard it actually flipped my body over to where I was on my stomach and now facing the bottom of the bed. I sit back up, it grabs me again. I had no energy. I tried to yell for my parents, I couldn't get it out. And long story short, it let go, and I was pulling with such force that I flew back and put my head through the wall paneling. And then I was able to scream for my parents. They, of course, dismissed it as a nightmare. But that sparked my interest. So for 10 years after that, I did nothing but read and educate myself on everything that I could involving the paranormal and parapsychology until finally going into the field, doing field work in '97. That leads me to the second scariest, which was in, I want to say 2011, 2012. And it was at that farmhouse we talked about earlier. One of my investigators had went back into the house to retrieve a water bottle or something. And she heard somebody from upstairs kind of yell for me, like Stephen, like they were yelling down the steps. She looks up and she's like, wait a minute. She comes back out to where we were base camped with our campers and all that stuff, because there was no power here. It was literally roughing it. And she said, everybody's here. Did someone just come in the house? And we're like, no, you were the only one in there. And she said, well, somebody from upstairs sounded just like one of our investigators, said my name, but he wasn't in there. So it could emulate us. It could mimic us. And I said, well, this could be a sign. This could be a breakthrough. I'll go in. It was obviously asking for me. So I went in with the instruction that if nobody heard from me in 5 minutes to, come in, guns a-blazing, so to speak. And I don't make it up the steps. I get almost to where I'm going to step up onto the top step. And it felt like a pure ball of energy just hit me in the face. That feeling I best describe is when you try to put two magnets together and they won't go together. That feeling of resistance hit me in the face hard enough. It put me down the first half of the steps onto the first landing. I hit the ground. Few choice words come out. And then I hear a really low guttural growl like a dog. It's the best way to, but a really scary one. And I'm laying there kind of shocked. So I radio out to some of the members who were in the military at the time. And they come running in and they're like, what's wrong with your face? Like, what are you talking about? I flipped the camera around where I could see my face, and I had 3 slashes down my cheek, bleeding. I didn't feel like I was cut. I just felt like I was hit with a ball of energy, like force. But I was bleeding. I was cut. And it was that stereotypical cliche 3 scratch marks. So we pursued through the building. Don't find anything, nothing. It came and left as quick as it came. We come back down the steps. We're not halfway down the steps. My investigator that came in to my aid was picked up and shoved down on top of me, and we both went down the steps. We, kind of gather our senses and leave the building. At that point, I instructed everybody to pack up and leave. After 2.5 years, whatever was in there had made its point that it was finally going to start hurting people. And when something like that happens to you that is so unbelievable, that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, but you were there and you witnessed it, it's best to leave it be. And it was shortly after that I shut down the entire team and we all just became independent investigators. That place did a lot of damage, which it's in the book. It's known as Eidolon Fields and the Doghouse, those 2 chapters. But there have been books written about this location, full books on the entire 2.5 years of research there. One in particular is called Just Believe, and that's 2 of the investigators I worked with put that book together, and it's about all of the research. I had to, with my book, I had to just streamline, a couple nights into 2 chapters. But it's a very, very interesting place, scary by every definition.
Now, Stephen, do you believe that certain possessions can be possessed by spirits or evil entities, such as we always hear about dolls like Annabelle the doll, Robert the doll, and we've also heard about a chair in Scotland that's supposedly either cursed or possessed. In fact, legend has it that anybody who sits in that chair, they mysteriously die. Do you believe these things can actually be possessed or cursed?
I don't like to use the word possessed. I do like to use the word affected. I didn't. It's funny you asked that question because it wasn't 2 days ago. I posted a video of this doll that I've acquired, and the client that I was researching her building for, she was telling me the story about this doll. Anyways, I came along this doll in this old antique shop, and it was sitting way up on the shelf, like just for display only kind of thing. It wasn't for sale. And I thought, I'm going to figure it was calling out to me for some reason. So I pulled the thing down. I played dumb with the cashier and I say, hey, there was a tag on this, but it fell off. and it was a 1962 doll. This thing is old. I put a video of it up on my Facebook page a couple days ago. She said, oh, you give me $5 for it? I said, sure, sold. Took it. Ever since we brought this doll into the house, we've hooked the surveillance cameras up. We have surveillance running through our own house to catch this thing. I've never seen a doll. It's not electrical. Okay, it's not battery operated. It's just a doll, a little boy doll that I've called Norman, and he actually gives off an EMF read. I filmed putting a temperature gun on him, on his chest, and him dropping from like 74 degrees to 54 degrees in about 30 seconds. 20-degree temperature drop. And then I put on these little ion sensors. They're little lights that light up when ionic energy kind of comes by. I put those around him, and they're just flying off the charts like a Christmas tree. So this thing definitely has some kind of energy attached to it. And the creepiest thing, I'm still trying to determine what to do with this video, because I know people are going to want to see it. I was babysitting my girlfriend's grandkids, and I had surveillance in my studio because, it's where all the equipment's at and where I produce things. And they're on the bed watching TV, and Norman is sitting on the bed. Only we didn't put Norman there. He had left. He was sitting up on this dresser. And somewhere in between the surveillance glitching, he just shows up in the middle of the bed. None of us noticed this happen. Well, then my girlfriend's grandkid turns around and looks at him. I'm not seeing any of this. My back's to the kids. I'm on the computer working on something. But this is all happening right behind me on surveillance. The doll moves its head to look at me.
Wow.
Then turns its head back around to look at the grandkid. Then he starts laughing, the grandkid, and turns right back around and watching TV. And he tells me this, and I'm like, one of y'all moved the doll. So I rewind the surveillance, and there's this glitch. It just all of a sudden appears on the bed. Then he's telling me about it moving. Sure enough, that doll sitting there straight up. Again, it's not mechanical in any way. It turns its head to look at me, like to see if I'm looking or not, and then turns its head back down and look at him, and then just stops moving like it never did anything. Pretty wild. It hasn't done anything to intimidate anybody, but we're finding it like in different places when we leave and come back. We're finding objects missing. Hey, I didn't put my keys there. Why are they there now? That kind of stuff. And it's ever since we brought this doll in. So to answer your question, I think if you are attached to something in real life, why wouldn't you be in the afterlife? If you were a child who unfortunately died and you were attached to a specific teddy bear, why wouldn't you still be? And that energy's there. Is it the teddy bear itself actually doing it, or is it? I kind of like, I avoided using the word possession because I describe it more like a remote control car. That remote control car looks like it's moving on its own. There's no wires. It's going up and down. It's racing, but something's controlling it. back behind the scenes with the remote control. And I believe what people believe is possession and demonic possession, all this stuff, is just that. It's like being remotely controlled by, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, by some sort of entity, spirit.
It almost sounds that instead of living inside of an object such as a doll, that if someone were emotionally attached to a personal property, some portion of that person remains with it, watching over it, maybe even playing with it in the case of dolls, sitting in chairs, turning the pages of books that they once really loved. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Sure. I mean, it's like so many people tend to forget that what we are doing, we're researching people. That's what we're doing. We're researching people. Yes, they happen to be dead by a biological definition, but they were people. And people tend to forget that, when they scream out the word demon so much, especially on television. Is it a demon? Or is it that guy that was, a rapist or a murderer in real life? If you're a bad person in real life, 10 to 1, you're going to be worse in the afterlife because you have attributes we don't. And I think the demon label's often put on there. And I think the good, there's just as much good as there is bad because that's real life. That's human. And I think if you're attached to something, if you loved a particular toy or even as an adult, if there's something you just absolutely love, this picture of somebody or whatever, it would make sense that if you have a consciousness after death, that you would still think about these things. I know I would kind of travel around checking on my friends and my family and, obviously be the biggest prankster in the world after I die. But, there are things that I would never want to see gone, and especially, people that never got to say goodbye to things or to people or to an animal, a dog or a pet, they still have purpose. And again, is it voluntary? Is it involuntary? We just don't know. But the stuff is being done for one reason or another.
For one reason or another, that is true. It definitely is true. Well, Stephen, I have one last question for you. And that is, if time travel were real here and today, where would you go to and what would you do?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Oh, there's so much. I'd love to go back to before like certain songs became hits and then be the one that writes them. Before, be Metallica before Metallica was Metallica. I know I'm obsessed with Billy the Kid, William H. Bonney. I have books on it. I just love that history. So I would definitely travel back to meet Billy the Kid. There's no doubt about that. And I would travel back to, let's say the 57, late 50s, see how much truth was in this alleged cryptozoological werewolf case that I think it was Truman, I think had something to do with in the FBI. I would travel back to Roswell. Travel back to these things that we still have in question today, I guess, is my short answer, to see the actual truth. What really did happen? Did Jesus really walk on water? Did he really turn water to wine? Those are the things I would go after. And then I'd go after a way to make a lot of money. Like become an antique dealer like the dude in Highlander.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Stephen Lancaster. And again, Stephen has a book out titled Dark Spirits, a man terrorized by the supernatural, which you can find at mysteriousmatters.com/darkspirits. Well, folks, until the next time we do come back together again, I bid you all a kind farewell.